Thank you, everyone. My name is Lee, and in a nutshell, my work focuses heavily on color, as this is a very powerful tool to shape your storytelling. So today, I want to talk about how we can transform your animation from flat to feeling by using very stylized shading to shape your narrative. And this talk is based on my experience being an independent animated filmmaker with constant limits, like I don't have a big budget, time constraints, etc. However, without letting those constraints holding me back, I found a very effective and very stylized way to shape my visual identity for my animation. So the challenges, the biggest challenge for me, again, is that as an independent filmmaker, you will have a very limited budget. That means you won't have access to those high-end rendering resources. And I only have a very basic hardware. I only have a regular desktop. It's by no means a fancy studio setup. And thirdly, time constraints. At that time, I was working full-time as a PhD student in psychology in the United States. That means I won't have enough time working on this animation. So I would only spend time during the weekends on this. So again, as an independent filmmaker, it means just little old me doing my thing there. You won't have other, like collaborators or teammates. And with these limits, at first, it feels like a setback. But over time, I realized that actually they can push you into trying to find more creative, more innovative solutions for your project. And the sweet spot I found right now is a non-photorealistic rendering, and then combined with line art, outlines with toon-shading. And I'm solely using Blender's EV engine right now. And this approach dramatically reduced the rendering time, and at the same time, it provides a very, very unique visual effects to the entire film, which is exactly what I want for my project. So a quick overview about the toon shaders. Usually, people would use solid colors, and sometimes they would use outlines or like line art to give this hand-drawn feeling. However, based on this example, it looks quite flat, right? Quite basic. And today, I want to walk you through how we can transform this flat animation into something feeling, and transform this basic animation into a very breathtaking one. So bring your toon shader to the next level. And the overview of my talk includes several topics. First, I want to talk about how we can use stylized shading to boost feeling, and how we could use intentional color choices to convey emotions. And then I also have some interesting lighting tricks to enhance the mood. And we can also guide attention through camera movement and also color shifts. I also have a very unique texture setup for expressing different vibes in the animation. And lastly, I want to spend some minutes talk about how we could use cost-effective character design with expressive identity. So first of all, the color strategies. Background info here, my animation is about the concept of the brain in the tank. Essentially, everything is just illusion, and we are just imagination, invented by this brain trapped in the tank. So my animation started with a girl went on to an adventure, but eventually she realized that actually she is the brain in the tank. Quite a basic idea, right? And in this project, I intentionally used different color palettes to indicate different stages of the story. So in the beginning of the story, I intentionally chose those muted colors, such as gray, white, and black, to set the tone. And as the story progresses, I added more saturated colors, such as red and bright orange. You know, even without the help of dialogue, the viewers will naturally know what the stage of your story is at currently. And in the beginning of the story, even though I chose muted color, I didn't choose those flat or solid colors. Instead, I want something special, right? So I developed this special ink wash shader, which essentially mimics the traditional Chinese ink wash painting, or 水墨 in Chinese. So instead of solid black and white, it creates a very nice gradient here, and it gives you a vibe of unrealistic, right? You know, like this painterly feel is very beautiful. To set this shader up, it's pretty straightforward. I see beauty in simplicity. And essentially, the key here is to use the color ramp and set it to be constant. That's where you will have this nice fine bands of colors that will be responsive to the lights. So you can see here, this shader is reacting to the different locations of your spotlight. If you move your light closer to the object, it will look slightly darker. And for the best use of the shader, I would also open my video editor and slightly change the sharpness of the visuals, so that it will give an even stronger visual effect that this one is like painterly feel, right? And related to the ink wash shader, I also discovered a special technique, which I would call the reverse lighting. So normally, if you have a spotlight near your face, it will naturally light up the area, right? However, my case is quite the opposite. So instead of brightening up the area, it will actually make the area look darker. So this provides a very eerie, very uncanny quality, and this is exactly what I want for my animation. And there are several variations in this work. For example, you could have harder border for the shadow, or you can have like softer borders. And the third example I included here is that where I use the fine line textured quality and I add it to the face. And this even adds more feeling that as if, you know, the entire work is made by hand. And the shader setup is quite straightforward as well. So again, include the color ramp and then set it to be constant. And for this specific case, because we have like little fine lines all over the faces, it means you want to use a similar texture. So I used the wave node and then connected with the texture coordinator. That means it will have fine lines all over the surface of the object. And if you move the spotlight closer to the object, then the fine lines will all appear, as if they're like some textured dark shadows. And if you move the light away from the face, then the face will actually be brightened up. So you can see the example here. Even though the character is not making any facial expressions, it looks drastically different, even with those shadows, right? If you have the heavy shadow on the face of the character, even without no emotion, it will look very intimidating, and that's the charm here. And as the story progresses, I added more color here. And for this part, I specifically follow a rule, common sense. Yes. So I am follow common sense of how people perceive color. Usually, green, blue are associated with feeling calm and peaceful, right? And on the other hand, red often signals, something dangerous is about to happen. So in this case, the character met somebody, and she sensed that something is going off. Something terrible is about to happen. Therefore, I transitioned green to red to reflect this feeling of uneasy, something is about to happen. In the other case, the character met a potential enemy, and she managed to escape. So at first, I used this dark red and black color to indicate a very depressive situation. And once the character managed to escape, I immediately switched to blue to reflect the sense of relief here. And to set up the shader is very straightforward as well. First, you need an image texture, and then connect it to the mixer, and you want to set the blending mode to either be color burn or overlay, to achieve a stronger visual effect here. And then you can tweak the color. You can move it to lighter color or darker color to reflect different mood here. And for the image texture, I recommend people using more complicated ones, with very, very fine patterns, like a tapestry. Because imagine if you use a very flat color, like no pattern at all, like a solid green or solid red, and you want to transition from red to green. It will look exactly like traffic light shifting, right? So in this case, you could experiment it a little bit with more complicated patterns, like a tapestry, or the sweater handmade by your grandmama. It should also work too. And the bottom line here is that this takes some time to experiment a little bit with the texture of your choice. But the result will be very promising, as it definitely, with slight shift of color, it will convey so different emotions in the scene. And in my film, because it's about illusion, so it totally makes sense to add water and screen reflection. And to do this, you will need to enable screen reflection, retraction in Blender. And to make animated water scene, there are actually available tutorials online, for example, by 3D Hopped on YouTube, where they use shape keys to animate those realistic waves in the water. And the shader is quite straightforward as well. The key here is that you want to change the color of the glossy shader. And the general rule would still be, if you want to have a peaceful, like a calm scene, then you can go for something lighter, right? Like a light pink. However, if you want to have a very uneasy scene, like to signal something is about to happen, then you could use a more drastic, like more dramatic, more saturated color here. And another trick that I really enjoy doing is using the documentary-inspired camera work. For me, personally, I'm not a big fan of having a very still camera setup because it feels very boring. Instead, I really like having this handheld movements, especially during those intense scenes. For example, like somebody is chasing your character, then handheld camera movement would definitely be the top choice, you know. This setup would actually produce a very like a raw observational vibe to the work, and make the audience feel that they are actually witnessing something, you know, and it's happening like in real time. And the camera setup include, you know, adding noise modifiers to the camera movement and sometimes to f-stop. You could also change the focal length, you know, from, for example, from 90 millimeters to 30 millimeters to achieve something like this effect. And for the camera noise, it takes some little experiment, but rule of thumb is that you always want to start something small, as smaller noises would actually be more natural here. And texture. So this is my illustration. I do digital drawing also. And my style is like I really enjoy having a very jittery texture right next to a very smooth texture, because I think it naturally draws the audience attention, right? And to do this in illustration, it's quite simple. You just select the area and then increase the sharpness. You can also duplicate the sharpened area and then change the blend mode to either color burn or multiply to even intensify this visual effect. And now I want to bring the same style to my animation, like this. And this is how I did this. I call it the little dirty trick. So no geometry node needed. What I've done is by just looking at the output RGB curve. It's really unconventional, I know. Essentially, you are experimenting with the output RGB curve. So I first pull up the overall RGB curve and then go to the individual like red, green, blue curve, and then pull them down a little bit, and then like do some tiny experiments here. And I ended up with different examples here, right? And then I would compare between each other and find the most optimal one. The third one is the final version. So this trick is totally unconventional and takes time to experiment. But I really like this little trick here, and it actually saves, you know, like the rendering time as well. And lastly, character design choices. So because I have so much limited resources here, I decided to paint the character's body as if she's wearing a tight jumpsuit. Just trying to keep everything simple. However, I still want to add the vibe of like the movement and life. So that's when I added a cape and butterfly ribbon to the character, and they will be responsive to the simulated wind. Because I think wind is really powerful in terms of providing the ambience here. And this approach relatively reduces the rendering time because essentially the character doesn't have a clothing, it's all like painted over the body, right? And nature elements would also be a very amazing tool to enhance the ambience. So personally, I like using fog to indicate the situation is depressive or is mysterious. And in Blender EV, you could also use like a beam of light to highlight the character's facial expressions in darkness. And like I mentioned before, I really like the combo of wind and reflective water to give this dreamlike feel to the animation here. So key learnings about my journey. Don't let the constraints hold you back. You're stronger than it. You will definitely find out unconventional, very cool solution to this. And then experimentation is definitely essential. You want to try out different ways to solve the technical constraints. And visual language is definitely very important, and you can use the combination of color, camera movement, or texture to convey the complicated emotions you want to include. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Again, art thrives despite constraints, and again, this is an illustration drawn by me. I really love color. If you have any questions, or if you have a similar experience, if you want to share your journey dealing with those technical constraints, please come talk to me after this presentation, and you could find me online, on Instagram or YouTube or whatever. And thank you so much again for building this lovely community. My journey won't gone this far without the help of the lovely Blender community here. So thank you.